It is 1982. The waves lap softly over the pebbles just metres away. You take a long drag from a cigarette, enjoy the gentle sea breeze and look back to the mainland. The little boat that brought you here lies nearby. This is a perfect holiday, a perfect afternoon, on a perfect little island, with no one around for miles, not even a sheep. It's the most relaxed you've felt for a long time, even though you're thousands of miles from home in a country where you barely speak the language. Who cares though? Everybody's been welcoming. You even waved to a passing boat as you shade yourself from the sun underneath the big sign. That's the only real indication that humanity's ever even been here. It's a shame that you can't read it. Maybe those people on the boat that's getting ever closer now, could tell you what it says.
Gruinard Island. This island is government property under experiment. The ground is contaminated with anthrax and dangerous. Landing is prohibited by order 1981.
From Be Quiet Media and The Big Light, this is Scottish History Out of Order, a podcast about history and where we made it. I'm Michael Wilson Park. It is 1981. Blackpool has long played host to the conference of the Conservative and Unionist Party of Great Britain. It has alternated years with Bournemouth as the party of power comes to the seaside to convince the people of the nation that they can eat a 99 just like the rest of them. Margaret Thatcher has been in power for 2 years, and if you thought that something was in public ownership, then boy howdy was Thatcher trying to privatise it. Thatcher's poll ratings are at rock bottom, and the Tories are desperately trying to stop a split from within their own party as a group of MPs move for open revolt on economic issues. The conference takes place amidst an environment of riots and protests against government policy, which was seen as being designed to, destroy the working class's ability to provide for their families. And all the while, there's a little container sitting in a back room of the Winter Gardens where the conference is taking place. Just a tiny little container. No bigger than a jam jar, really. A jam jar that could kill every single sitting Conservative MP in the building. All they have to do is open it by accident. Luckily for them, no one does. Even luckier, the contents of the jar are perfectly safe, but it is designed to look like another package which was found at a government facility in Portondown in Wiltshire. The police were on alert because many newspapers had begun reporting, deep in their pages, about something called Operation Dark Harvest, a group who were threatening to send dirt to government facilities all across the UK. And you might shrug, because who cares that somebody's sending dirt to facilities all across the UK? But the authorities sat up and took notice, because this wasn't just any dirt. The Dark Harvest Commando, as they like to be known, claimed to have harvested dirt, 300 pounds of it to be precise, from an island that just a year later, 2 tourists would be picked up from by the police and subjected to rigorous health checks before being released. They had taken dirt from Gruinard, from Anthrax Island. It is 1943. There's a small bang. Really no more than a pop to the ears of the people and primitive protective equipment nearby. A US Navy lieutenant is filming the whole thing in glorious colour, ready for a voiceover to be recorded at Portondown at a later date.
The men wear ordinary cloth overalls, rubber boots and gloves, a respirator with particulate filter, cloth hood to keep the hair clean and reduce risk of face piece leaks. The canister is worn on the shoulder and is covered with a cloth pre-filter.
Unfortunately, the recording's pretty degraded now. The bit you can't hear is about the cloth hood being worn by the personnel to keep their hair clean. The tube that's just exploded isn't much thicker than a household drain pipe, but as the smoke dissipates, a thick, soupy brown cloud hangs in the air and begins to drift slowly, oh so slowly, across the heather. It's anthrax. Everyone on the island knows how dangerous the little spores are. Well, everyone except the 80 sheep that they bought from a local farmer. They were there to inhabit the island that they bought for £500. The sheep, held in their individual little pens, pretty much unable to move, begin to exhibit signs of high temperatures. They're shivering, they're twitching, they develop a harsh cough, they begin to bleed from the nose and other orifices. They suffer from fits and lose their appetite, becoming completely dejected as the end approaches. However, outwardly, they look mostly normal, despite their bright, staring eyes. Within days, the entire flock of sheep, all 80 animals, are dead. The calculations have been done. If a bomb of this kind was scaled up and designed to release the gas in a populated area, say, for example, I don't know, a German city, say, Berlin, not only would the death toll be in the millions as people inhaled the gas or ate food from the contaminated ground, but the city would be uninhabitable for decades, maybe even centuries. This was scorched earth on a grand scale. In the tense mass destruction stalemate in the years before the nuclear bomb was dropped in 1945, biological and chemical agents were the weapon du jour in mass murder. That had been proved in the trenches of World War I, where mustard gas, chlorine and other chemicals had wrecked the life of many an unprepared soldier. Allied commanders didn't see any reason why the Nazis wouldn't use them, despite Germany being signatories to the Geneva Protocol, which banned their use in 1925. So an eye for an eye, right? After all, spies were everywhere, and the Allies knew that Germany was stockpiling huge quantities of poison gas. They also knew that they were testing them on people in concentration camps. And since spies were everywhere, the Nazis also knew that the Allied powers were stockpiling huge quantities of various agents too. Mutually assured destruction. Sound familiar? And yet, the government believed that having the information and data to support the bombing of a German city was vital to the war effort. And so, the last of a flock of sheep rasped their last breath just a few agonising days after their exposure. And then, they were dragged up to a cliff overlooking the mainland of Scotland, just a few short miles away, and pushed over the edge, before thousands of pounds of explosives were used to cover up their carcasses, bringing the cliff down on top of them. These things don't happen in a vacuum, though, especially not a really strong stone's throw away from the mainland. A Wellington bomber was brought in, once in 1942 and once in 1943. It flew low-level runs over the island and dropped bombs containing anthrax onto its targets. Yeah, more sheep. But the island's proximity to the mainland was becoming a problem. The Chemical Defence Experimentation Station at Portondown, responsible for the site on the island, left a van containing flasks of anthrax being returned for winter storage, sitting overnight in a car park in Leeds. Then a storm dislodged some of the sheep burials and sent contaminated livestock floating over to the mainland, causing an anthrax outbreak in mainland Scotland. According to declassified documents, the government installed a scientist in a hotel at Alt Bay to deal with compensation claims and keep the locals as quiet as possible. After all,
careless talk costs lives.
Plus, the Allies had another plan altogether. Since dropping a bomb laden with anthrax onto a civilian population was a bit too much like a thing the enemy might do, ignoring, as everyone did, the kind of biological warfare used in the British Empire by colonial powers, they came up with an alternative. Using the results of the experiments on the island, they were able to determine that if livestock inhaled anthrax, they would die. And if Germany had no cattle to feed her people, then it would fall. And it would take thousands, if not millions, of people with it. All they had to do was poison hundreds of thousands of linseed cakes. You know, the kind that cattle love to eat, and drop them on German fields. The cows eat the cakes, the cows die, it takes the population with them, and not only do you get a much wider spread of civilian death, always a boon apparently, you don't actually have to drop a bomb on the Reichstag to get the desired effect. The plan was called Operation Vegetarian, and was due to go into effect in the summer of 1944. But by then, the Normandy landings had happened, and Allied forces were beginning their push through France and into Germany. So, probably best not to poison a potential food source. Operation Vegetarian was canned, and 5 million anthrax-laced cattle cakes were incinerated. By 1945, it was becoming obvious that Hitler was never going to order the use of biological weapons, not least because he didn't have enough bombers left to order an attack. So the project on Gruinard Island was shut down. Well, kind of. The agreement with the original landowner had been that they'd be able to buy back the island for the original price that the government had paid for it. A bit rich, since they'd dosed the soil with a deadly toxin and rendered it unfit for habitation, but it is what it is. In an attempt to decontaminate the island, they burned the heather to destroy the spores. It didn't work. Without any further real consideration, the island, which was now a burnt landscape more reminiscent of Mordor than the Inner Hebrides, was quarantined and left alone, save for once a year when a team from Porton Down would return to take soil samples and change the year on the warning sign. The same warning sign that a team, calling themselves the Dark Harvest Commando, claiming to be microbiologists representing 2 universities, ignored when they snuck onto the island and took 300 pounds of contaminated soil from right under the nose of the nobody that was guarding the place. The same warning sign that 2 tourists, unable to read English, enjoyed a leisurely day under in 1982, until they were taken away by the police. The very same warning sign that wouldn't be removed until 1990, when finally, the poisoned isle was declared fit for habitation. This was 4 years after a decontamination effort in 1986 sprayed nearly 300 tonnes of a solution of seawater and formaldehyde over the island. And then, once again, they left a flock of sheep to graze the land. When they returned, the sheep were alive and well, and Gruinard Island was sold back to the descendants of its original owner for £500. You've been listening to Scottish History Out of Order. It was written and produced by me, Michael Wilson Park. I got married! And is a co-production of Be Quiet Media and The Big Light. Additional voices in this episode were by Brian McAlpine. The sequence on protective equipment is taken from the declassified film Gruinard Island X-Base Anthrax Trials 1942-43, which is in the collection of the Imperial War Museum and is narrated by John Morton. The music for this episode of Scottish History Out of Order is by Mitch Bain. Thanks for listening. Look after each other. We'll see you next time.